this video we are going to cover the photography basics for those who have bought their first DSLR camera and are trying to understand it. This video really helps those people who really don't know what to do with their camera or what are the uses of all those buttons and settings that are given. Grab your DSLR camera along with the provided manual and let's get started. Note, this video might be describing a camera which is different from the one you are having or using. Don't worry, the terminology might vary but the concepts remain the same. Your camera manual helps you to understand the terminology related to your DSLR camera. The first feature to know is understanding autofocus modes. Every DSLR camera gives you a choice between manual and auto modes. Set your camera on autofocus (AF) mode and let your device do the job until you understand the basics. Focusing manually by adjusting the lens rings is not so easy and requires more practice and time. It is an undeniable fact that even professional photographers still use their DSLR cameras in autofocus mode. It is easy to switch between manual focus and autofocus with the switch that is available on the lens itself, and you can also do it through the menu. As a beginner, capturing pictures in autofocus mode will save you a lot of time, and in addition you will also get that sharp focus and great image quality you're after. The second option to know is which autofocus mode should you use and when. DSLR cameras have different autofocus options and will mean different settings which totally depend on the subject that you are going to choose. You can select required modes from your camera screen under menu options or by using a button provided on the body of your camera. For example, FA, Auto Servo Autofocus mode. When you select this particular mode, your camera has full control and it will decide at each shot if it is FA or FS. This can get really confusing for the beginners when they are shooting both moving and stationary subjects. For that reason I don't recommend this FA mode. The other mode and highly used by many photographers is FS, Single Servo Autofocus mode. This mode helps you to capture stationary or slow-moving subjects like landscapes, flowers, food items, statues, slow-moving models, etc. When you are using your camera in FS mode, it allows you to lock the focus of the subject when you press the shutter button halfway, and capture the photo when pressing it completely. The third mode that is available in your DSLR camera is FC, Continuous Servo Autofocus mode. This mode helps you to capture the photos of moving subjects like vehicles, animals, sports, kids, etc. In this FC mode, your camera will automatically adjust focus continuously while the shutter button is pressed halfway. The third option that we need to know is what are autofocus points and how to choose them. Camera's self-adjusting points are a visual representation of what your camera is focusing on. They usually appear on the camera's viewfinder or LCD screen as empty squares or dots. When you buy a camera, you'll commonly read specs referring to 9-point or even 51-point autofocus systems. How to choose focus points. First, you will need to select the autofocus area, AF area, using the menu in your camera screen. By selecting the single point AF, your camera will focus exclusively on the single focus point that was selected by you. This option is really good for capturing the steady subjects. If you select the dynamic area, you will need to select a focus point manually. If the subject moves even a bit, the camera automatically refocus using surrounding points. It is a very good option for unpredictable moving subjects. There is also a 3D tracking mode in some cameras. When you select this mode, you will select one focus point. After that, by releasing the halfway pressed shutter, you can change the composition. Then, the camera will select a new focus point to keep the subject in focus. Last, you can let your camera decide where to focus while capturing a picture, auto area. I don't suggest utilizing this alternative in any DSLR cameras, because your camera doesn't know what is the most important subject in the complete frame that you are going to capture. The fourth option to know is, what are different metering modes and when should we use them? Your camera uses a light meter to find out the correct exposure settings for any scene. Similar to the automatic camera features, you do have any control over how it actually works. Let's look at the various metering modes and when to use them. Regardless of whether you're shooting in automatic mode, a semi-automatic mode, or full manual, your camera consistently figures accurate exposure settings, either to use or simply display when it believes you're under or overexposed. It works by calculating the amount and intensity of light reflecting off of objects in the scene. There are three principal metering modes: center weighted average metering, spot and partial metering, and evaluative, pattern, or matrix metering. On contemporary digital cameras, you can choose between them. The process differs by manufacturer and camera, so look up your manual if you want to shift modes. When you choose the center weighted average metering mode, it works on the assumption that the most important part of the image is probably in the center. It measures the whole scene but places extra emphasis on the light values in the middle. When you choose the spot and partial metering, it works in the same way as center weighted average metering mode. Your camera just measures the power of light from a small circle in the center of the scene. The main distinction between this mode and center-weighted averaging is how large that circle is. Whereas, evaluative or pattern or matrix metering is the improved version of center-weighted average metering. Rather than expecting the middle as the most important area in a photo, evaluative metering takes into account things like where you've put the focus point and what else is in focus. Generally, evaluative metering is the best mode to leave your camera in. How to utilize the meter to check your exposure. You can see the light meter to find out if your camera is getting the enough amount of available light or not. You can see it when you press the shutter release while you are looking through your viewfinder or in live view. This may vary depending on the camera model, but the concept is always the same. When the meter is at 0, the camera sensor is getting the right amount of light. When it is towards the sign, the photo will be underexposed, too dark, and when it is towards the plus sign, it will be overexposed, too bright. The fifth option to know is aperture and shutter speed. In order to adjust the amount of light, you can start adjusting two settings that are available in your camera: aperture and shutter speed. Aperture is nothing but adjusting the size of the hole that lets light into the camera. The bigger the hole, the more light goes in. Shutter speed is the measure of time for which your camera's sensor is presented to light. The longer it is exposed, the more light you have. The thought is adjusting these two settings until you get the ideal measure of light. If you are getting too much light, you can either close the aperture or have the shutter open for a shorter duration. If you are getting too much dark, you can open the aperture or leave the shutter open for a longer duration. As beginners, this might be complicated, but don't worry, our DSLR cameras help us a lot with their semi-automatic shooting modes, which are known as aperture priority mode and shutter priority mode. You can select them using the dial on your camera body. How to utilize aperture priority to control the depth of field. When you choose the shutter priority mode, you need to adjust only the aperture settings. In shutter priority mode, your camera will automatically pick the shutter speed to get the right light exposure. The aperture units are nothing but the f-stops. Little f values relate to wide apertures, big holes, more light going into your camera. And large f values correspond to narrow apertures, small hole, less light. This influences how sharp/blurry the background will be in your frame. Choose high f-stop values if you want the entire image to be sharp. If you want the blurry background, choose small f values. The last point to know is how to use ISO to modify your camera's light sensitivity. ISO measures your camera sensor's sensitivity to light. The lower the ISO number, the less delicate the sensor. Higher values means that the camera is more sensitive to light. This permits you to take photos in darker situations, such as indoors or even outdoors when light is getting more fragile. But, your photos will have a grainy effect which is known as noise. So you need to make sure that it is worth having some noise for more light. There is an option to select the auto ISO mode in your camera. Your camera will pick the ISO setting in each shot relying upon the specific lighting circumstance. Check the manual to know how to access it in your camera. Digital SLRs might seem immense at first. But with a touch of training and following this instructional exercise, you will soon master DSLR basics and take awesome shots. Change the settings to see the impact they have on your pictures, practice as much as possible and be patient. It is significant that you make the most of your learning cycle. Have fun and experiment with your camera. Soon all these settings will be important for your photography stream and you will change them normally.